Well, one of the things that we're always find ourselves talking about is how to work on, infrastructure, right? Whether it's infrastructure that matters more or investing in education and investing in healthcare. For a country that is developing, you fall into these these two paradigms in conversation. Does this country developing need more roads and buildings and this, or does it need more investment in the people, or does it need more investment in the so one thing that you will notice is the smarter people are, the more they tend to lean more toward the investment in the people and investment in education, investment in healthcare. The more sort of basic they think, they tend to think more investment in like infrastructure and roads only. So, and I'll clarify that more. Both are important, obviously, because you don't want a bunch of really smart people walking around with their gadgets who don't have roads to drive on, who don't have infrastructure to use and things like that. They're both really important. And at the basic level, it seems like Nigeria's really kind of like the governors and everybody that's involved has really preferred to go more towards the sort of physical infrastructure. That's like sort of the priority right now, roads and everything. Fine, I'm in agreement with that, because once you have momentum, once you're doing something and you're making progress at it, I'd rather that just be, focused on and done well, as opposed to kind of like, not doing it well, not doing it thoroughly. So I'm for that. I encourage that. I see lots of good things with the Lagos Badagry Expressway. I see just, good things that people are excited about, and being excited about something and working on something is a good thing. So I think they should keep doing that. But the important thing to realize, though, is that as you invest in education, as you invest in healthcare, the people, the capital, the human capital that you're going to build is going to do all these things for you, so that you don't have to, the government doesn't have to do all of it in the same way. There's going to be company contractors that will propose it, that will come to you and say, that will come, government in quotation marks or whatever, and say, and suggest things and want to do things and pave their own parking lot and pave the road in front of that there's going to be so much more, of imbibe that stimulated human capital and stimulated energy, but a lot of those stuff will get done and will get done via that mechanism. So that way you don't have to do all of it for the people, for the already. So that's where the focus on human capital and on education and healthcare becomes important, because what that's really doing is investing in people. It's hard for somebody who doesn't, I mean, I hate to say this, but somebody who doesn't have like a very good education or technology or whatever to understand why that would be more important or why that would be more useful, because they would just want to build things that look, a certain way. But that's important too. Like I said, I think that physical infrastructure is very important. And because also it builds like a sense of pride, because you don't want your cities to, no matter how smart you are and how much you can do, you don't want your cities to look like shit to look bad, compared to other modern cities. So I will definitely say that the physical infrastructure is very important as well. But I definitely think that we can't but more important and more crucial is really having great education, really having great healthcare, and really building up the human capital, so that will do a lot of that stuff. We'll be burgeoning with energy, so that a lot of that stuff will get done via that. And not really require you having to borrow or all that stuff, because if you have that much generated in that way, all that stuff will do that for the for the environment. Which brings me to another thing, is that what then that requires, as always says, is sort of a partnership between an interest in supporting private enterprise and supporting up and coming, and finding out how to sort of help them optimize, so that they can give the economy, give the environment the boost that it needs. But I just wanted to address that, because I hear that back and forth going, whether there is more, it's more crucial to to have all the physical infrastructure versus that. And I think one more thing to focus on is when you're focused on infrastructure, physical infrastructure, it's important. That way you're not wasting things. For example, I've been hearing that few people reuse the railway. So the Kaduna Abuja, like all that money that's being spent on rails kind of wasted, and they're never going to make that money back. And that roads are more important because that's what people actually use. So it's also very important to have a vision when you're doing the physical infrastructure, so that you're not just, yeah, it looks pretty and it's big, but I think that in a place with limited resources, I think it's important to have purpose, whether it's like for, trade between all the different countries, all the neighboring countries in Nigeria, or between different states, or whatever the purpose is, I think it needs to be there. For example, one really useful thing is the fact that Lagos, like, it's just too congested, right? Like my brother was just in Lagos, and what the first thing he complained about was like the immensity, the craziness of the traffic. Okay, so that's something to break up. And what you want, and what that also does is that it prevents it from being everybody just trying to live in the same space, just in a really small area, just because they don't want to deal with the traffic of going from there to there. So if you build more highways that go out to sort of neighboring cities, that helps. So there's a purpose there. There's a vision there. We want more highways that go across. That way this area isn't so congested with people, and they can live in different cities and that are sort of adjoining, and it's easier. So I think that's really important with infrastructure, with physical infrastructures, so that you're not just wasting money and making, of course it's nice to have pretty cities, but so that in a place with limited resources, in a developing country, it's important to know why are we spending, especially if you're borrowing money to do it, why are you doing it? What is it going to accomplish? That way you can measure the success. It not just like cut ribbons and smile, and I mean, no offense, but just more and more purpose behind it. This will make this happen. We're doing this because that will facilitate that. We're doing that because that will facilitate that. That's helpful, because then there's it's addressing specific things, and you're not wasting money on infrastructure that is not, especially if you're poor, if the country's poor, you want to make sure that you're doing things that are really needed and that are useful, and that makes sense. And then the rest of them, and then you also want to make sure, again, that you're spending money on the other kind of infrastructure, which is investing in the people and making sure that setting them up to be able to build as well, so that all the building isn't being done by government. So that's something to keep in mind too. So that's it. Like, which is, if you build the people, they will also be part of building the infrastructure just instinctively, because their business isn't what they're doing is going to need all that stuff, and they'll be willing to, not even in taxes, they might be perfectly willing to just literally build them themselves. So that's important to keep in mind. So I just wanted to address that regarding the sort of dynamic, how we pursue infrastructure. So I would just say that, like, we pursue it with purpose, with what are we hoping to get out of it? Because if we're borrowing money to do this, and we're borrowing money to build this road, and we're borrowing money to do that, we have to be calculating already, like, who's going to be using it, and how are we making, like, this million people's lives easier? How are we making that many people's lives easier? Because, when you see the ribbon cut, you don't really hear any of that. It just seems like they take more pride in it being done. And again, it's nice to have pretty cities, because you don't want your cities to look worse than other more developed countries or whatever, but that's not like, that's not the end goal. If you're really trying to, rev up the economy and rev up the people, that has to be your eyes has to be focused on that. And that has to be the real driving force. And the more that's the case, the more you'll get more for what you're doing, and you won't have, 5,000 Naira bridges that anyway, you have things that are really helpful, and that's good. So, because the more actually helpful something is in ways that are tangible, in ways that you can hear and see and things like, the better it is.